Yeah, thank you so much. It's really special to support independent bookstores, and Asheville's a favorite place. So thanks for hosting.
Absolutely. I'm very honored by your support, Stephanie, and also Patricia behind the scenes there. You have done an amazing job of supporting literature and literacy, and we're very grateful to you. I think there are a number of writers who may have logged on to watch us tonight, and so I always like to start with a little bit of a tip. It's a little bit cornball, but this is the way I usually start. So the author, Lisa C., has this great quote, and she says, read 1,000 books and your words will flow like a river. So in other words, if you want to be the best writer you can be, read a whole bunch of books and of course get them from Malaprops. Mark, do you have a favorite quote?
I do. I love yours. Mine is not so much instructive as yours, but it's a favorite. It's absolutely a literary giant, and a literary model, I guess, for me, which is Tim O'Brien. And it's a quotation I just always love, which is, stories are for joining the past to the future. Stories are for those late hours in the night when you can't remember how you got from where you were to where you are.
That's great. I love that.
Hey, Jen, do you want to kick us off and kind of give us the
Yeah.
one
Okay.
sentence on Snakes of St. Augustine?
Oh, yeah. Okay. Our log lines, right?
Yeah.
So I'll give you my usual one sentence description is that Snakes of St. Augustine is an unconventional love story served up with a large side of Florida weirdness. And by Florida weirdness, I mean, of course, stolen snakes, a missing man, malevolent jesters, the usual Florida stuff.
The usual Florida stuff. And
yeah,
I got to mention before we move on. So if you look over Jendra's shoulders,
oh, yes,
there's two things. There's this amazing book cover, right? There's this live snake. So you got snakes on the book. I mean, your cover is just gorgeous, and I think Ginger and I both share the same publisher with Regal House Publishing, also there in North Carolina. And they do some beautiful, beautiful covers. So,
Mark, I was supposed to ask our viewers if anyone has a phobia and they will break out in a sweat if they see lemony stitches wiggling around. Please let our hosts know in the chat. Just hit the chat button there at the bottom. And this thing is on wheels. I will wheel it right off. We want to be sensitive to people that might feel that way. Sorry to interrupt.
And I'm bringing no live animals to the show tonight at all. I'm bringing a blizzard outside my window, but no live animals. Here's the line I always use, and it's so ambivalent. People don't know what to do with it, but to describe man underground. I just say it's this. It's hard to make friends when you live underground. Maybe you can tell us a little bit more about snakes, and then I'll say a little bit more about men underground.
That does absolutely sum up your book. And by the way, for people watching, Mark and I are mutual fans of one another. I just loved his book so much that when I found out he was going to be publishing with the same group at the same time as me, I immediately reached out to him. Okay, so here's a little summary of my book, just by way of introduction. So Snakes of St. Augustine follows a woman's quest to find her neurodivergent brother, whose name is Gethin, and at the same time, her sort of unexpected entanglement with this equally complicated man named Jazz. And it's a braided plot. Gethin's disappearance coincides with the theft of these 3 snakes. And there's a police officer named Fletch who's searching for the snakes as well as Gethin. And this puts them all on a perilous sort of collision course.
You know, I just want to throw in here that it's a great summary. Nothing can ever quite convey the whole of a book, and more than just fans of each other and holding up each other's book. It's very real, I think, for both of us. This book of Ginger's is literally a book that I can't stop recommending to people, and it's absolutely one of my favorites of 2023. And it's such a great ride in so many ways. It's moving, it's touching, it's surprising, it's a little weird. It's there's a mystery in there. It's just such a rich, wonderful book. You should be proud of it. Hey, Ginger, I'll mention we just did have a pop-up in the chat that there is someone there with a snake phobia.
Lemony's going?
There you go. That's problems.
How convenient is that?
Yeah.
Thanks for letting us know, a viewer. I appreciate that.
Yeah.
Okay, so your summary, with literary fiction, someone says, oh, tell me what it's about. And you have to start saying, well, there's a guy, he's underground, and there's a peanut, So how
It's
do you
almost
express
impossible,
it?
right? Flannery
It is.
O'Connor always used to say the only answer you can give is read the book, right? Or to tell the story of the book.
That's a
And
great
there's
answer.
truth in that. But here's my best attempt. So the book is titled Man Underground, and that title's very literal at some levels. So this is a dark comedy. And it's a first person narrated book, and this narrator quite literally has built an underground home. And he built it some time ago, and in the time since, a neighborhood started to kind of form around him. He purposely kind of chosen an out of the way place in a kind of out of the way flyover kind of smallish city. And the real story that starts to emerge is right at the beginning of the book. His life, which is very much truly the life of a recluse. This is a guy that walks everywhere, that doesn't really have much public interaction at all, that restrains himself to doing all his errands one day a week so he doesn't have to over involve himself in the lives of others. But his life is interrupted by a banging at his door up above him. Eventually the sound gets to him, and who he discovers at the door is the other principal character of this book. Is named Monica, who's a 17-year-old honors student and very eccentric, a little kooky, a really fun character, quite brilliant. She's also, quite the near genius, but who really wants to save the world. And in saving the world, she thinks the best way to do is maybe save this guy, because she's gotten wind that the city is reviewing his home at the complaints of neighbors to say, what's this all about, this guy that lives underground? So the book really becomes a pursuit of a unlikely friendship that emerges between the two, and then of course over time we learn both their backstories, and we kind of learn the reasoning of why the narrators become the recluse that he has, and from that hijinks ensue.
Yeah, well, I think it's an interesting mystery too. You don't know at the beginning why he is the way he is. And so part of the fun of the book is the unpeeling of these layers of this character. It's very beautifully done. And then, of course, your dialogue is incredible and frequently riotously funny. So
Well, thanks. Thank you. Well, it's one of the things that we're going to do today for all of you and have joined us, and that's another thank you we need to issue is to all of you that have come and joined us in the audience. And we will just welcome all the questions you want to ask and give you as much time with those questions as you want. But there are a lot of linkages that we want to talk about between the two, and one that we I think can't go without mentioning, as we've both kind of touched upon, and that's that there is a level of mystery present in both these novels. For me, it's largely about learning how this guy came to be the man he is now, and was he different in the past, and can he kind of return to society. For Ginger, it's more literal than that, and her book literally opens with a crime. But it's what starts the ball in motion, and then the book, part of the joy of it is it goes so many places, and it goes into characters with such depth that's really amazing. And we've kind of shared with the folks out there a little bit about what our books are about. Do you want to talk a little bit about how it came to be about for you?
Absolutely. I'll go there if you will, Mark.
Yeah.
So Snakes of St. Augustine had several different origin points. First, there was a workshop that I took a few years back with the Florida author Connie May Fowler. Some people may know her. Her most recent book was Million Fragile Bones. And then one of her earlier books was Before Women Had Wings. And she had this workshop in St. Augustine. And it was just this wonderful, enriching experience. There were so many talented writers there. Connie's very encouraging. And then St. Augustine itself, it's billed as America's oldest city. And it's just so rich with history that it's a very triggering setting. So that was one point of origin. And then I happened to see a TV segment, including some police body cam footage, in which a man named Jason Harrison, who was living with psychosis, had a perilous encounter with police. And I found that deeply troubling, and wanted to look at that phenomenon of people with differences encountering the police in those ways. And one reason I wanted to do that is because I've had loved ones in my life who had differences, such as my late brother, who had a constellation of things going on. And I could see the different ways that people would react to him. You know, people would think he's funny, or he's deliberately trying to confuse and spoof me, and that would provoke anger. And so I just want to explore this theme of people who have differences, and how they can sometimes be left on the margins of our society. How about for you?
Yeah, I thanks for sharing, because I think, you know, it's a reminder to all of us who write the variety of origin stories for the stories we find, and how, you know, the personal intersects all the other things we encounter across our days. You know, one of the places that we'll be talking about is something that Ginger's just touched on, because really at the heart of Man Underground is a similar question for me about what we both label otherness, and it's a word that Ginger and I both like to use, because it's a more encompassing term, and yet it's not such a labeling term. And so my premise is really simple from that standpoint, and that all this guy's chosen to do, from, you know, the stranger down the street, is build an unconventional home. And yeah, I think even that is enough, right? To be labeled other and different. And, you know, if you do that, you must be strange. And I just, you know, I think we live in a culture that's so quick to do that. But the origins of that, I wish I had a great story behind it. This is very typical of my work in a lot of ways, because I am absolutely a person who trusts in the organic processes of writing. This book came at an interesting juncture in my life, from the standpoint that I had, a couple of years before, left full-time teaching for the first time in life. And my spouse offered me this wonderful opportunity of time to kind of slow play the pursuit of the next thing. I've been writing for years. I've been publishing for a long time at that point. You know, as an academic, I'd taken, I don't know, a decade or something to write a book that wasn't that good. And so in that break that came, the first thing I did was rewrite that book, and found it. And almost immediately, within days of completing that manuscript, this one came along in my head. And it started in two places. One was a voice. It's a first-person narrator, like I've mentioned, and he has a voice that's a bit difficult to describe, because he can be very sarcastic. He can be kind of sardonic. He's really smart, but he can be egotistical at times. But his voice just kind of appeared in my head. And the other thing that showed up, and it showed up on the first page of drafting this book, was just this vision of a door standing kind of in space almost, kind of like the door to an underground cellar, you know, a root cellar, but a little bit like the door. I don't know. I had read, probably not too many years before that, the whole of Stephen King's Gunslinger series. And the second book in that series has this really wonderful cover of like a door on a beach, just like a frame and a door on a beach. And of course, he's playing the time. It was something like that. I think images of that door came to me from childhood, maybe, in a place, remembering such a house, an underground house in the town I grew up in. But those were bits and the pieces. And then I didn't know where this was. There was language almost immediately from this narrator, who kind of talked about, you know, what it's like to be seen. And so the metaphors that show up almost immediately, like, what's it like to be, you know, to be out on the prairie, you have to be in the savannah, you need a tree you can hide in. And there's all this stuff about kind of hide and seek and all of this. And that, I was smart enough to recognize how it could play later. And that becomes important later in the book. but within a week of writing, the 17-year-old Monica showed up.
Yeah.
And that's when I knew I had a book. And a lot of the book is, as you've mentioned, it's dialogue. And it's this kind of crazy talk between these two people as they come to know each other. But the second she arrived, I knew I had a book. I didn't know what that book was, and I just trusted the process, and discovered it. And then along the way, discover some of the themes that we'll be talking about.
Yeah. So your characters tell you what the book's going to be.
Yeah, I've always written that way.
Motivations and their
Yeah,
characters.
yeah. And I don't trust a book until I can hear its voices.
Well, so you mentioned that we had some themes in common between our two books. And so that's kind of how we structured our conversation for this evening. 3 topics in particular: characters who are different and society's tendency to turn them into the others; unlikely friendships, because you've got that going on with your main character and the teenager, Monica; and the power of community, or as you're saying, the random acts of kindness that make life worth living. And these show up predominantly in both of our books. Shall we talk about the first topic?
Yeah, absolutely. You want to lead us?
Sure. Okay. Yeah. So what I love about your main character, and I won't, we'll call him Mr. Badger for these purposes. What I love
he never gets named, so might as well.
Yeah. Well, he's got a few different names.
He's got a lot of different names.
Right? Yeah. So he challenges our assumptions about people we perceive to be different or others. And of course, there's been a lot written on this topic across literature. The most frequently cited one would be Toni Morrison's The Bluest Eye. And in that example, the people of color are the so-called others, but more broadly, anyone with a difference, skin color, ethnicity, nationality, gender, sexual orientation, or neurodivergence can be cast that way. And in your book, Mr. Badger, excuse me, just one second. In your book, Mr. Badger is kind of a version of Herman Melville's Bartleby, who says he prefers not to work. Mr. Badger prefers not to be with other people. And his grief has driven him to this subterranean home. We don't know, why until toward the end of the book. So can you talk about why he's being perceived as so different by his community? You mentioned that a little bit earlier. But
yeah, and this fascinates me generally, not just through this novel, but in other work. But it fascinates me, and I think it's part of why I'm so drawn to your work as well, Ginger, and why it spoke so loudly to me. As you suggested, part of Man Underground is the mystery of the discovery of what's happened in the past. If someone decides to remove themselves from society, you kind of assume there's been an occurrence, there's been something that's driven them towards that, and that's the case with this book, and eventually in the book that's kind of the big reveal. But what it gave me from the first page forward of this book was what's that reality like and again, I kind of, as the book formed and I started to recognize the nature of the book I was writing more and more, I wanted to pursue this idea that it's the simplest thing that can make you be viewed by others as unconventional, as different. And it saddens me that I feel like we're particularly living in an age where we're a culture that's really quick to do this. We're really quick to label, and we really struggle to understand anybody that doesn't kind of meet our sense of convention. I love where I live in Western Montana. It's an absolutely beautiful place, but one of the difficulties of living in this place is that it's a rather homogeneous population. And one of the results is that people can be awfully quick to assume anybody that's in any way different than that homogeneous vision of themselves is someone that's difficult to understand. That's a terrible stereotype on my part, and certainly not applicable to all, but you encounter it with some great regularity. And so I wanted then to pair this guy with someone else that gets a similar kind of lane. My Monica character is extremely eccentric. She is one of those, the classic 17-year-old that acts and does things without necessarily thinking them through. That's spontaneous about everything, that is idealistic, that wants to save the world, that will jump on almost any cause that presents itself. But that's someone that's kind of been damaged too, and damaged in her past, and doesn't kind of fit any of the right patterns. And if there's any place that wants to live by categories and labels, it's a high school, right? And so she's really living in that point in her life where she's extraordinarily frustrated with her life and with her peers, and uncertain what to do next. And so yeah, it's that otherness that really drives a lot of this for them. Your otherness is far more complicated than that, and it's part of what's so wonderful about snakes.
Thank you.
I wonder if you'll talk some more about it. And I mean,
Absolutely.
we meet neurodivergent characters. We meet a homeless guy that proves to be both someone very capable of wanting to be loved and should be loved. We kind of have an unlikely protagonist that has to save other.
Yeah. Let me go into that, but I'd like to point out that this is water.
See, I'm hiding it in a
gonna
Yeti
lose my
mug, so
voice, so I had to
mean,
have a glass of water nearby. So, yeah. I'm presenting several neurodivergent characters. So the missing brother, Gethin, he's described as having this constellation of issues that doctors have never really been able to pin down. So when he was small, they said he had special needs, and later there was a question about whether he was on the autism of compulsive tendencies. In this unique way, everything, both in his head and in the environment, has to have its place. So he has buckets all over the place, and he's putting things in them. And he introduces himself to everybody by oversharing, saying he likes snakes and music and hiking and so on. And the other character, Jazz, is an unhoused community college student, as you said. And he is really smitten with Gethin's sister, Serena. He, at the beginning, he's struggling with racing thoughts, racing speech. He's been fired from his bicycle repair job because he talks too much, his boss said, and so forth. So I wanted to present these people as in their full humanity, not just as stereotypes. But they definitely are otherized by their communities at the beginning.
Yeah, I hope among our listeners there's an increasing desire to say, wait a minute, I want to know what's in this book. States Snakes of St. Augustine, because he should. I think the treat of the book is that you just said, I wanted to treat them with, as whole members of humanity, and then give them a kind of a full circle development of treatment, and you do it so beautifully. And it really intrigues me that these are characters who never quite allow labels to adhere to them, literally right down to the psychological labels that they might get in a professional setting, which I think is so important, because on the one hand, of course, it's not defining at all. And on the other hand, it's always slippery, right? And by being fully rounded human beings, there's so much more than, a kind of categorization of some of the tendencies that they show and some of the thought processes they show. But this is something else that I think is fascinating about your book, and I wonder if you'll speak to it a little bit more. That's the nature that, we get them fully as they are. There's never any judgment cast on them. There's never, like I say, a diagnosis placed upon them. Characters make decisions across the book in which they seek out diagnosis and such in one instance. But Gethin in particular, he goes about the world in the way that Gethin goes about the world. And it's a very singular vision of the world. And, you know, when you meet him, you realize you're better for having met him, that there's things that he can teach us.
Well, I didn't want to give them specific diagnoses. So that's a good observation. I deliberately avoided giving them labels because I think that people, it's human nature. Once we hear autism spectrum disorder or bipolar or whatever the case might be, we automatically sort of put that individual into a category.
Right.
And I didn't want them to become two-dimensional. So
right. And we make assumptions. You know, it's been fascinating ever since I read your book and since we've got to know each other a little bit. It's made me think about my own characters in new ways. And I think I've written two characters that if they were in a professional psychological setting, they probably wouldn't both be labeled with some mental health condition. And yet, at the time of the writing, it never even occurred to me. Which I guess is a living embodiment of what you just described, right?
Exactly.
Of treating them as the whole person. Yeah. Yeah.
Well, I'm noticing we have 15 more minutes here and we have 2 more topics. So do you think we should move on to
Let's keep moving. Yeah.
Okay. Okay. So characters in both of our books wind up in unlikely friendships or alliances. And I just wanted to mention that our mutual friend, Laura McBride, had described your book as subtly elegant and a gently intellectual moving story of the friendship between a man with a broken spirit and a teenager with a soaring one. And I think that's a lovely encapsulation of the dynamic in this book. So can you talk a little bit more about Monica and what motivates her to get to know your main character? There's a little bit of a Beauty and the Beast scenario here.
Yeah.
As you said, she shows up at that famous door in the beginning in her punk-inspired outfit. And they just have this constantly entertaining banter, which is fantastic. It keeps the pace of the story moving along really well. Do you think she's being altruistic, or why is she befriending him? Can you say that without any spoilers?
Yeah, no, I think I can. And thanks for all of that, including quoting Laura, which is just one of those great blurbs that you're so honored to get because I love her work so much. And I'm glad that she's a mutual linkage between us as well. Yeah, for me, Monica is in many ways best defined by her total sincerity. I think, you know, there's lots of statements people make about, you know, the life process and the changes you undergo and how people grow more conservative as they grow older and all these kinds of things. And one of those kinds of assumptions we make is that there is an idealism present in youth that will get, you know, eroded away over time. But I very much wanted her to represent that and to be entirely sincere in that. But she's also, Monica is both practically smart in a lot of ways, and she's intellectually extremely smart. She's quite well read. She's interested in everything. One of the things that these two characters find common ground in and why they can really form a depth of friendship is they both have an absolute love affair with music. My narrator actually made his living prior to choosing this lifestyle as a music critic and a music writer. And that so fascinates Monica when she finally learns that alone, you know, kind of raises him on a different kind of level of interest for her. But she's smart enough to also understand, you know, some of the old adages that we follow in the environmental studies world too, with the whole idea of you might want to think globally, but you have to act locally. And she takes that quite to heart. And so here's this guy that she thinks presents herself with a chance to, you know, save this little piece of the world. Yeah, right. A challenge. And that's part of the challenge too. Now she's completely crazy how she goes about it, because on their first meeting, she based, you know, kind of triggering off of something he says, you know, dreams up this whole notion of, oh, well, yeah, you're right. All we have to do is distract the neighbors, and then they'll leave you alone. They'll move on to something else. And so this is where the absurdity of the book comes in, because Monica's grand plan is to create this whole campaign of, you know, kind of teenage types of pranks and such to offer neighbors a different interest. And her master plan becomes a campaign of yard art relocation that she eventually brings the narrator into.
Brilliant.
Which is part of the fun of the book, but it comes from a point of real sincerity, and a real belief that you can change things. And one of the places we want to get to as well is this idea of community and kindness. And for me, that's part of it too, is that Monica really does believe by acting with kindness, you can do good and you can change lives. And that, selfishly, there's a message there that I hope resonates in people with this book.
Sure.
Yeah.
It does for me.
Now and part of the fascination of Ginger's book is that we do have this just the most unlikely pairings in the world. And part of the fascination, honestly, is how these lives come across each other's paths. And I mentioned the mystery that kind of starts the book, which is just a thread. It's a small thread that runs through the book, but it's a consistent thread. To no surprise, involves snakes. And that actually becomes the thread that can bring people together in ways that they never would have expected, including those that run the snake facility and the police that are sent to investigate, and these characters that come to really become kind of a family. So how did that occur for you? And then what was it that thread that got you to the linkages between these characters, or how did that come to be?
Well, the title of the book and the main theme is, of course, that snakes are a metaphor for mental health conditions. So, in other words, many people are very afraid of snakes and will either run away or attack them on sight. And in a kind of similar way, people who have neurodivergent conditions are often feared because their behaviors are not well understood. And what I always like to say is there are 44 or 46 species of native snakes in Florida, and only 6 of them are venomous. And similarly, most people with these conditions, the vast majority, are no threat to others and are much, much more likely to suffer violent attacks than the rest of us because their behaviors are different.
Right.
But I was going to read the little part where
would you?
Where Serena first meets Jazz.
Please do. It's a beautiful little piece.
She hits him with her car while he's bicycling. And he's on the road there. So this is a very short little reading. His outstretched hands quivered. Red rivers streamed from matching stigmata on his palms. "Am I bleeding?" he said. His helmetless head was soaked. Ropes of coppery hair stuck to his cheeks, which were hollow and freckled. His eyes, wide open and unblinking, ratcheted around, strangely feline and beautiful, the brightest amber. One of them drifted off to the side. He lowered his hands without looking at them and crossed them over his chest, prayerful. The robin's egg blue of his shirt turned red. There's a little blood," Serena said.
I just got to step in and interrupt you for a second, Ginger, because while I want to hear more about the question at hand, this passage is so illustrative of your work and the precision of language and just that embrace of language. It's such. I mean, here you have this. It starts almost as it's not a comical situation. She's hit him with her car on his bike, and yet it's hard not to laugh at it too in the context of a conversation like this. And then you write it with this kind of lyricism and beauty and such. And I just both want to applaud you for that, but also I'm just curious, like how much of that in your process is always a part of what you're trying to accomplish? To really think about language and think about description.
I think that just comes naturally, and maybe because I sort of grew up in the woods at a time before all the woods were paved over in the city of Atlanta where I grew up. And so there's this very immersive feeling. I actually have to tone that down. I get way too flowery and carried away. So I did make a deliberate effort here not to, saturate my readers with that kind of stuff. But we should try and squeeze in our remaining 4 minutes, some comment on the power of community and random acts of kindness. So I think that's a good segue. The author, Liza Wieland, is it pronounced Wieland or Weiland, said that your book reminded her that grief met with patience and the willingness to listen can be grief gently and incrementally eased. And you said in your author's note at the end of the book that you hope this novel will offer a reminder that we're more alike than different and that all our lives would be better by more acts of kindness, those given and received. And I just think that's so lovely. And the book truly exemplifies that philosophy, and it is a wonderful reminder. So that was that something you did, you know, from here up? Did you think about, I'm going to write a book about the power of kindness, or did it just sort of emerge?
Not initially, but certainly in revision. And thanks again for bringing that forward. When I, you know, a blurb like Liza's is it's particularly meaningful to me, not just because it's such a sweet blurb, but as I've told you from the beginning of this conversation, you know, this is a dark comedy. It's a comedy. And yet, yeah, but for thanks for that. But for to have readers recognize that it can accomplish these other things, and that it's about these other things, and that there is this kind of salvation that comes in it, and that's very meaningful to me because it's very much what the book became about. Did I know where I was going originally? Not at all. Once I'd written the first draft of the whole book, so I got closer and closer and closer to the end of that first draft. The more, you know, there's this point, I think, when we're writing that we start to, you know, you have to start to shift your perspective on your own work. And that there comes a necessary point where you have to read the book outside yourself. And you have to read the book, you know, as a reader will eventually read the book. And so as I started to make that adjustment, you know, it made me have to really think about the ideas this was developing and the themes. Yeah, what does this mean? And that's so then it became top of the head of recognizing, wait, there's an opportunity here in what these characters represent. And so that became very purposeful on revision. And I do hope that the book does offer a reader a kind of reminder that just, you know, by being the best parts of ourselves, you know, that we can make the world a little bit better place, and that it's worth it. But it's worth it to be of the best spirit and not give into our mean-spiritedness, and that we'll be healthier for it, and our communities will be healthier for it, and that we can change people's lives. But to me, that was only reinforced in so many meaningful ways when I read Snakes of St. Augustine. Because one of the things that's really, this has just stayed with me more than perhaps any other element of the book, is by the end of the book, we take all these disparate characters, kind of fall in the ways that we were talking about, into lives together. And they form a different kind of family. I don't think community is even a strong enough word. It really feels like family. And they're so accepting of one another. And sometimes that's a really demanding thing, given some of what happens in this book. And there's just such genuine love there. How aware were you of that during the process of writing the novel?
I think it was pretty much the same journey as you were describing. So I finished the novel, and then I looked at it and thought, well, what does this all mean? And for me, there was one passage about Jazz, the young man who's fallen in love with Serena. And he's unhoused, as I said, and he's in the park and going to community college. And he describes feeling, he says, as if he's a homeless, potentially dangerous ghost, out of focus and wavy around the edges. In other words, he's feeling the sense of invisibility because he's unhoused, and also because he has this obvious neurological differences. And like you, I really wanted readers to take a look at people like Jazz, who are different and possibly difficult, and living on the margins, you know, and think about the ways in which we're all similar and all worthy of inclusion and compassion. That's a goal. That's an aspirational goal for me. Often fall short. But
I was just writing about that this morning. Yeah.
So that's it. Well, let's see, Stephanie, did we have any questions at all?
Hi, yes, we do. And thank you both. First of all, I'm going to start by reading a comment that we got, a really nice comment from Virginia Pye, who's another writer who had to duck out early, but before she left, she said, "This is a wonderful conversation. I'm touched by how generous the two authors are toward each other's work. Their novels sound wonderful. I've ordered them both, so."
Hey, Virginia.
Thanks, Virginia. Yeah.
So thank you for Virginia. And I'll just agree with that assessment. It has been a wonderful conversation. Thank you. And we have a question from another writer in the audience. You weren't kidding, Ginger. The audience is full of fellow writers, which is awesome. We love that. So Mickey Dubrow, who we actually hosted not too long ago, if you don't mind me, I'll put in a plug for folks to look him up on our YouTube channel. You could watch that conversation. Hi, Mickey. Mickey has a question for both of you. Do you feel social media has contributed to people's tendency to label people other?
You want to go first, Ginger?
Yes, that's my answer.
Yeah.
Because
Yeah, absolutely.
We present a perfect version of ourselves, or we attempt to, on social media. And so perhaps that is unrealistic. What do you think, Mark?
Oh, absolutely. And, I'm going to go this far. I spend a lot of time. I have 7 grandchildren, and well, I have 6 grandchildren, 1 on the way. I guess we're already counting them. I spend a lot of time thinking about the world that they're inheriting and some of the ugliest parts of this world, but the pressures they face too. And one of the pressures I don't know how to help them navigate best is this. I think social media, it feels to me like this has been the typical, right? We have these waves again and again and again of promises of usually technological changes that could do so much good and can do so much damage. And we as humans have to figure out how do we take on the good, right? And restrict the damage. I mean, and we've seen it with social media. I mean, it has a power, it has a capacity. I mean, think about the Arab Spring, it has this power to do good. But it feels like time and time again, we choose to kind of dissolve to the worst parts of ourselves. And yeah, I think it's inherently dangerous, and exactly for the reason that Ginger identified, that we create completely unrealistic portraits that our Instagram images do not reflect the actual people behind them, but the power that they have, particularly in young people, to think that they want to pursue objectives and such from it. I think it's a really scary and dangerous thing. And I think inherent in it is a kind of an automatic labeling, because the other problem with social media, as we all know, is the tribalism that we're facing in this country is only worsened because you're only hearing from the same tribe, right? Again and again and again. Whether that's a healthy one or an unhealthy one.
Good question.
Yeah, great question.
Thank you. Thanks both for that answer. I will go ahead and also give a shout out to Mimi Herman, who chimed in earlier in the chat, and who we also had the pleasure of hosting. Hi, Mimi. And I may have missed others. I just full disclosure, these are folks that I know because we've hosted them. So if you're another writer who's in the audience in the chat, forgive me if I didn't recognize your name right off. So we don't have any other questions from the at-home audience right at this moment, but I always have a question or two. And so if you'll indulge me while we're waiting for more questions to come in, I'm wondering how much we often have conversations with writers about place and about sense of place in their writing. And I know both of you have not necessarily always lived where you are, right? And you're writing about certain places with these books. And so I wonder about how you approach that, and about how you get into the place that you're writing about, and how that factors into the final version of your book.
Oh, I love talking about settings, Stephanie. But you might have to stop maybe for a lecture pursuit. So, there are all kinds of different settings, as you know, just the straight background type thing, temporal or environmental. And that's my favorite. And I think that is true of a number of Southern fiction writers as well. I'm not sure why, but for me, it was because I grew up in a place where right after school, my mother would open the back door and we would run into the woods and not come back until it got dark. And so those smells and sounds and sights really kind of ingrained themselves into my imagination, I think. Yeah, what do you think, Mark?
Well, similar for me. Yeah, setting is so I've done workshops on setting because I can say so much about it. It means so much to me. And like you, and that's how my childhood was too.
But you're using an environmental setting too. You're not just using
yeah, absolutely. And it's interesting. My last book before Man Underground is a book called The Other Side, which is kind of a literary mystery, I guess. Oh, a mystery of literary pretensions. How's that? But it's set here where I live now. It's set on Flathead Lake, which is the largest lake west of the freshwater lake west of the Mississippi, which I can see right out my window. And so setting was everything for that. And so that book has kind of gotten legs in certain places, people who know this environment. Man Underground was challenging in a really specific way for setting for me because I knew I wanted to not pin it down. I wanted to be vague. So I kind of view that this book could be set literally in any kind of smallest city from kind of about the Mississippi River to the Continental Divide.
And yet it's so universal and
yeah,
there's a specificity
I hope so.
to it.
I hope so. So in a way, yeah, it's also an attack on suburbia, right? Particularly suburbia of a certain ilk, which is kind of the small city that's, where the inner core is already degrading, even though it wasn't the kind of place people label a city. But it's also about suburban mentalities. And so, yeah, so it was a different kind of application of setting. At the most literal level, this book was a whole lot of fun to write just from the literal setting of imagining this underground house, which, I mean, the dude builds a bathroom all out of aluminum, and a drain. He can just hose the whole thing down.
Perfect.
Genius.
Yeah, so my first book was set in Atlanta, and then the second one set in Florida, where I live now. The third one that I just completed is set in New Mexico. So that was really challenging because I've never lived there. I've been a fan of New Mexico for a long time, but so that requires a little bit more research, right, to pull that off.
Excellent, thank you. And so we have a question, maybe because I mentioned, I was talking about her, it might have happened at the same time, but Mimi has a question for both of you. And also commented on how gracious you both are to each other, and to your characters and your readers. And Mimi asks if you can talk a little bit about places where you struggled in writing your books.
I've got that one, Mark, unless you have an idea. From the first page to the last page. And thank you for that question. I mean, she is the author of The Kudzu Queen, which is this fabulous book. And Virginia Pye, of course, wrote The Literary Undoing of Victoria Swan, both outstanding and available from Malaprop. What was the question again, Stephanie?
Where did you struggle?
Where did you struggle? Yeah, for both of you. Yeah,
okay.
Where did you struggle in writing these?
So this book when I got to the muddy middle, you know, how writers talk about the muddy middle, I had to make a decision about what was going to happen to the brother, to Geffen. And because I had a brother who was very similar, I had a desire to rewrite his history, I guess, subconsciously. And I wasn't sure what to do. So I tried the Charles Fraser 13 Moons approach, where there are multiple realities that you can explore. And I just literally wrote the different realities to see what would work. And that was a great way to get past it. Plus, my writing group was basically telling me, don't give up. So
that's fascinating. Wow, gutsy too. Good on you. I'll go fast here. Couple things. One is this is almost always my problem because I'm a very organic and trusting writer. A lot of revision for this book was reorganizing the book, restructuring things, moving whole chapters. It became, you know, when I wrote the book originally, Monica showed up, I don't know, 30 pages in, and this was one of the few times I got it right. And I was smart enough to say, no, she now shows up, I think, on page 3. That she's such an important force in the book. She had to be present from the beginning. So that kind of restructuring and reshaping. The other was a very different challenge. And, you know, I was writing about this development of a friendship between a 17-year-old and a 40-something, a male and a female. And so I had to figure out how I was going to navigate around all the obvious kinds of, you know, potential potholes in that, and not wanting readers to misinterpret things, and not wanting, you know, the text to go in certain directions, and really allowing these characters to truly have a fully platonic friendship emerge. And so that was, you know, a very conscious kind of navigation in revision.
And that's beautiful. That's beautiful. As a reader, I thought, okay, what's this going to be about? And it was just delightful that it was this unique, refreshing kind of dynamic.
Yeah, it's a hard book to like talk about abstractly, right, with readers that don't know the book as a result, because yeah, I think it's really open to all the worst kinds of potential misinterpretation.
Well, we are getting right to the top of the hour, and it's been lovely to sit in on your conversation and to talk with you both this evening. Thank you so much. Just want to give you each an opportunity for any final thoughts you have before we say goodnight to you and to our audience. And I'll yeah.
Can I just jump in and just again, thanks, great questions like Mimi's. Thanks to you, Stephanie, and all the work you guys are doing there at Malaprop. Thanks, Ginger.
Yes.
You know,
thanks to everyone.
yeah, and I'm just so thankful that our publishing journeys came together in a way that allowed us to form a friendship and a collegiateship as writers. And I get to look forward to seeing Ginger in a few weeks in Kansas City at AWP. So we'll get to meet in person.
Yay.
So thanks to all.
Thank you again, Stephanie and Patricia.
Thank you, Ginger. Thank you again to everyone who's been with us this evening. We appreciate you, and we encourage you to pick up copies of Snakes of St. Augustine by Ginger Pinholster and Man Underground by Mark Hummel. Thank you for all of your support of independent bookstores everywhere, and the authors that we bring together with you as readers. And please stay safe and well. We hope to see you again. Good night, everyone.
Good night.